to adjust their messaging quickly. And email became the go-to for most brands in terms of reaching customers. So now, especially Josh and Stephanie, you guys are live event companies, and all of a sudden, no one can go anywhere. So that's a huge impact. And Stephanie, let's talk with you first. How did you initially respond?
So initially, as we discussed yesterday, there was a lot of brands that were in your face with emails talking about how they were addressing COVID. We didn't want to send out a message that was just saying COVID is out there. We all know that. We wanted to make sure that it was relevant. It was a relevant message. So many of our messages at the beginning were very transactional, dealing with what is going to happen to my event. That was what the customers were looking for. How is this going to affect my event? And at the very beginning, we didn't really know. We didn't know how long it would be affected. So we wanted to make sure that we had that communication. The other thing that we did was really overnight, we turned from an event company into a content company. So we really focused on our content. And previously, prior to COVID, we had subscriptions that went out weekly. We had a food of the week newsletter, a workout of the day newsletter, and then a weekly newsletter that focused on lifestyle content. So we pivoted and turned to a daily newsletter that kind of focused on all three of those topics, and really just wanted to get to the core of our company, the core of our brand, talking about the Spartan resiliency. We want people to feel better. And in a time where everyone's feeling broken, we came up with the concept of the unbreakable newsletter, focusing on all different topics and really a cross-channel experience, calling out what we had going on social. We had a lot of training content, a lot of video content. Our CEO, Joe DeSena, was doing workouts every single morning, and we pulled that into the email. So it was really, you got that email in the morning and it drove to the Facebook page from this morning's Facebook feed of Joe's workout.
And Josh, you went through a lot of the same thing as far as not knowing how long this was going to happen. I mean, no one did, but as an event company, this is a huge impact. So talk about what your first response and where you went from there.
Well, Stephanie kind of stole all my answers, so it's tough to follow. But I've been saying, we went from an event company to, a social and digital company overnight. So, football is all about the live action, and all of a sudden we didn't have any live action or really access to most of our players, who are the people that our fans care most about. And so what we tried to do is become more of a source of education. So we moved almost completely off of selling. We, typically in a normal week, we'll send 1 to 3 emails that are, selling, whether it's single game tickets or season tickets or group tickets, things like that. Instead, what we started to do was provide some education material that we thought the fans would appreciate at that time. So for example, we created a workout, just like Stephanie said. We had our head of strength and conditioning do a workout in his backyard, and he could only use things that were in his house because people couldn't go anywhere at the time. So it was, no weights, but we used Tide bottles. We used other kind of, lawn chairs and things like that to do dips. So we tried to make that part of it very educational. We also had our head nutritionist do something called Easy Eat. So she prepared meals that were quick and easy, things you could do in 8 to 10 minutes that were keeping your family healthy, because all of a sudden parents were cooking at home a lot more frequently. They were preparing breakfast and lunch when a lot of times the kids would get those at school. And then the last thing we did, which was really fun, is we had our players, the few that we could connect with, we had them read books, like story time to kids. So the parents, as a parent of 3 little ones, I was reading a lot of books in March and April and May. And so it was nice to get a change of that. And we had some of our star players read kids' books. So it was called Story Time with the Jags. And we used email to send out all of the different content that we were producing. And it was all, the other thing is, it was all very lo-fi. So we moved away from, our expensive cameras and our production team, and it was all done by cell phones. So it was a totally different type of communication, but it worked really well for our team.
Yeah, and now Mike, you're kind of on the opposite end as a, personal care D2C. really worked out to be more of an opportune time for you guys. So talk about that and what you guys did.
Yeah, similar to what Stephanie said, and then what a lot of people were saying yesterday, is we didn't want to necessarily jump right into messaging about COVID, and we really didn't have any intention to. And then all of a sudden, the CDC graphic started going around, which was, if you haven't seen it, it's basically a graphic showing like 27 different facial hairstyles and which ones work well with respirator masks and which ones don't. And on that graph is a beard style called the Bandholz, which is named after beard brand founder Eric Bandholz. And so this graphic starts going around, and then it pops up. Stephen Colbert talks about it on the Late Show. And we come into work the next morning, and it was just an opportunity for us to have fun with it. And so much of our brand voice is really lighthearted and fun. So we quickly came up with a tagline or a subject line that says, CDC says Bandholz is screwed. And we sent that out because there was a lot of misinformation that was going around early on about facial hair and beards and whether or not having a beard would make you more susceptible to coronavirus. And there was nothing that the CDC was saying that, but people were just writing articles with misleading headlines. And so our initial response was just to say, be wary of misinformation. The CDC hasn't released any information to indicate that having a beard or facial hair makes you more susceptible. In the meantime, wash your hands more and don't lick any doorknobs. P.S. We know this is kind of a serious thing. So here's like a link to the actual CDC recommendations. And that was great. Like we saw over a 30% open rate on that email. And then as we moved into March and the tone started to change around coronavirus nationally, then we moved into the world of toilet paper shortage and soap shortage and hand sanitizer. And we started putting our heads together as an organization and figuring out what could we do to help that wasn't just us saying, hey, we want to help, but actually doing something. And we have this magical little utility bar here, which we decided to do. We did a really heavy discount on 3 packs of these, which kind of is like a dual-fold approach. Number one, because we were taking an object, a product that people need and that there's a shortage of, and saying, look, we're not necessarily trying to profit off of this, but we want to help and this is how we're going to do it. Number two, as a company, we don't ever offer discounts or do sales. Like it's just not a part of our brand strategy. So we saw a huge success with that. We sent out a personalized message from Eric, the founder, that him and I worked on together where, and we A/B tested those messages. We tried a short one that was really direct, just saying, hey, look, we're doing this discount on utility bars. And that didn't perform as well as one that was a little more, that was longer. And we framed the longer one with a bit more positivity in terms of, look at this as an opportunity to learn a new skill or to finally grow your beard or grow your hair out.
Yeah. And it's what you're saying and what all of you are saying in terms of, it was really listening to the trends that were happening and listening to your customers and then going from there. And customer behavior evolved as people got more used to living this new normal kind of thing. And so Stephanie, how did you evolve listening to your customers, seeing that they were obviously craving something still? How were you able to then, accommodate them and give them what they needed?
So a logical next step is the virtual races. So we implemented a virtual race product pretty immediately. It started as a free product and evolved into include an upgrade package. With that, we have a personalized email. It has a finisher certificate. It has your first name, your last name, the race that you ran, the date that you ran it, your finishing time. All of that information was being submitted by the customer and then sent out by my team with that finisher certificate and then a share to social virtual medal. So you can share that out to Facebook. we started implementing the upgrade packages, which gave a great opportunity for, we have a lot of sponsors, so getting our sponsors' names in front of the customers. If you're looking for some of that swag, you have the t-shirt and the medal. There's a lot of people who are out there looking for that. And then putting that in their hands along with the sponsor box that has select sponsor products. We saw an additional 1 million in revenue there. We saw an increase of 104% of emails acquired in the same period this year as we did last year. So we did use that as an acquisition tool as well. And additionally, we looked at a lot of what we were doing as well during this time period. And I think Ali had mentioned it in the previous session. You don't want to send out a birthday email that is giving a discount to something that they can't use. You can't go out and run a race right now. So we really evaluated what we were doing with some of our triggered messages. We had our welcome series, which focused a lot on the different types of races that we offer. So at Spartan, you could do a sprint race, which is a 5K, a super race, which is a 10K, or a beast, which is a half marathon, amongst other products. So rather than kind of focusing on what our different race types are, we pivoted in that welcome series, reduced the cadence of the welcome series. So went from a 4-touch welcome to a 2-touch welcome, introduced our Unbreakable newsletter and the content that we were providing, and then also focused on products that were relevant to right now. So we're selling masks, we're selling hand sanitizer, make sure that that is going into the customer's inbox. So it's not something that they get welcomed to the brand and it's clearly from 3 months ago prior to COVID and no longer relevant to them.
Right, but you, as you know, you are businesses, and that's something that it needs to come back to play. So Josh, I want to pose this to you, because at this point you're seeing, you know, your customers, they're changing behaviors. When does sales come into play, or does it at this point, or how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, so the way that we focus on, I'll start with kind of the shifting, of the customer behavior. So when we first started our quarantine content, as we called it, we were sending emails out with that content almost daily. Because
I love the fact that your actual newsletter was called quarantine content. It's not like a behind-the-scenes discussion.
Yeah, we that one didn't take long to think of the name for sure. But what we realized was we started to produce so much quarantine content that it became problematic to be sending emails basically every day. So what we shifted originally was to doing social daily. So we'd put up the new videos every day on our social channels. And then on a weekly basis, much like Stephanie talked about, we had a newsletter that we created. It was the quarantine content newsletter. So it was the best of each week. And those newsletters performed incredibly well. We saw anywhere from an 8 to 12% lift on open rates for those emails, because there was no sales messaging in it whatsoever. It was very passive, but it was really just about putting interesting content into the hands of our fans at all times. When it came to shifting to the sales side of it, so we've recently shifted over the last probably month. And the way the NFL works is it's very cyclical. So the time to kind of normally we'd be selling, season tickets in March and April, but because of COVID, we backed away from that. And instead, what we had to do is completely revamp what we were selling. And instead, we came up with a very flexible plan. So if anything happened to you or your family, you could get out of your ticket package at any point. You could put your ticket package on hold for a year and come back in 2021 without any repercussions. So things that have never gone on in the sports world before, we had to kind of completely revamp what we were selling to make it as flexible as possible. And even in that, it was tough to ask for a sale, right? When people are losing jobs and when people are scared and when there's a health crisis, we still don't know. I mean, we're still waiting for the league to tell us how many fans we can have at games this year, right? So we're kind of selling an unknown product at that point, and that's a really big challenge. And so what we had to try to do is be as creative as possible, as flexible as possible, and really go from a harder sell to a much more friendly discussion, as opposed to trying to close anybody, because we could all completely understand why they wouldn't want to buy right now.
Yep. And that's really what it comes down to, that flexibility and changing what you're doing to adapt as your customers and consumers are also changing. And Mike, I know that you sort of found things through looking at trends, and what you kind of sort of jumped on to, you know, again, they went with what everyone was going through at the time, and that was hair care and beard care. So talk about that and how you not took advantage, but, you know, you guys were able to jump aboard that.
Yeah. Early on, right, like I was saying, early on in March, our fears were that people were going to shave their beard because they needed to wear masks. And by the end of March, instead, we saw things like Corona beards was trending on social media, and like Jim Carrey was posting about it, and Kevin Hart, and all these celebrities were talking about quarantining and growing beards. And then that matched up with the search trends that we were seeing, with people searching for things like how to grow a beard or growing a beard or how to trim a beard. And that really kind of directed what our content strategy became. It was all of a sudden we had this huge influx of men that were staying at home and letting their hair grow, whether that was on their head or on their face or some combination of both. And so all of the content that we started putting out was really centered around what to do with all this new additional hair that is showing up on your face and head. And yeah, I mean, it's over the course of Q2, we saw 40% growth in our newsletter. Our open rates were way up. Our click-through rates were up by 2 whole percentage points. And so one of the things that at Beard Brand, because we're a small team, we're able to move really quickly on content creation. So we can turn around an email in a matter of hours, or we can turn around a new YouTube video in a couple of days. And so we were able to really, like you said, jump on the momentum that was there, and really just get people who are looking for information on how to manage their grooming routine while in quarantine. We typically, when things are normal, we do a whole series of barbershop videos where we work with local barbers here in Austin, Texas, and highlight different hairstyles and haircuts for men. And those are really popular, but we had to pivot with those, and we partnered with those barbers to create a whole series of tutorials on cutting your own hair. And so those were things that we could send out directly to people, because we saw with men, you had pretty much 3 options in quarantine. It was to just let your hair grow. And so we kind of did content around getting through those awkward stages, or you could give yourself a buzz cut. And so we did a little bit of content on that. Or my favorite, because we've been pushing mullets since like 2018, was if you're going to give yourself a haircut, the mullet's the perfect way to go, because you don't got to worry about cutting the back.
That's perfect. You know, and actually I utilized those how to cut your hair, not Beard Brand, so I don't have a mullet, but yeah, put my hair in a ponytail and snip. So I didn't get anywhere. So I am one of those people. So before we open it up, I want everyone to have an opportunity to ask you guys questions. So just quickly, what is it that you're taking with you? What is it that you've discovered? I mean, there's all these different discoveries, and I know there's a lot of value to many of them. What is it, the most important one that you really want to take with you moving forward after the crisis has sort of passed? Again, we can start with you again, Stephanie.
Okay. So really, we did see a huge growth in our audience size for our newsletter. We grew our audience size there by 146%. Sending them daily, and with that daily send, we actually saw an increase in open rates of 48%. So there's definitely something to take away from that. Additionally, as we have kind of gone through this time, we made sure that we were putting that relevant content into our targeted sends. So making sure that the items that we were highlighting were what was in stock. And additionally, I think, Josh, you had mentioned it's a hard sell right now. So you want to make sure that you're providing that valuable content. So we went with like the soft sale tactic of providing out that content, but then doing the soft sell within the article where we were driving out to our shop website. So we saw a 63% increase in shop revenue there from that content from prior to COVID. So just taking away some learnings from there. we really were able to, as an events company, race is really our area of focus. And we were able to figure out during this time, how do we treat the other legs of the company, the merchandise part of the company, the content part of the company. So we figured out some of those processes and what that looks like. So taking that into as we move forward.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And Josh, for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's been said, but I think for us, the content becomes king, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon, right? I think that we'll focus more on content, and it doesn't have to be football content. So I think this opened our eyes to, even though we're a football team, and that's why our fans follow us, they have a lot of other interests, and I think tying into those interests, whether it be health or wellness or, you know, kids, things like that, it provided some proof that those things move the needle as well. And it was actually in some ways really refreshing to focus on content. I mean, as a marketer, it's nice to focus on content and not just sales. So it kind of gave me an excuse to you know, push off the sales guys a little bit for a little while. You know, what was interesting for us, and was that we not only were dealing with COVID, but also the social injustice. And so I don't know if we have as many hard takeaways, because the kind of the intersection of those two things played a big role in open percentages and sentiment of what people thought about our team. Like, that's probably different than some others are dealing with. But I do think the one thing that was consistent and will change is that the focus on content, and also the depth of content. What I mean by that is not having to be so hi-fi all the time. I joked about like lo-fi and through the cell phone video, but that's actually a really engaging type of content. So it doesn't always have to be overproduced, which I think a lot of times teams, because we're at the forefront of it, tend to do. So that was a nice feature as well.
Yeah, I think that more authentic is what people are looking for now, rather than, as you said, that overly produced video or any piece of content. And Mike, what about for you?
Yeah, well, a couple things. The growth that we saw in our newsletter is something that now, not so much a lesson learned, but it's created an opportunity for us to dig deeper into our audience segmentation. And so those are some things that we're doing moving into Q3 and Q4 for 2020. But I think a big takeaway from me was to not make assumptions about our audience. And I'll use an example. We launched a new product in early April, which was really like right heavily in the middle of everything. And it was a men's eau de perfume, which we had a conversation about whether or not it made sense to launch this product as planned, because people aren't going out. Like, why do people need cologne or fine fragrance? But we ended up going forward with it, and it ended up being one of our most successful launches in company history, which I think it speaks some volumes about our customer base, but also just not to make assumptions that things may not work.
Yep, just jump in, as they say. So Steve, do we have any questions for these guys?
We do. We have questions sort of about process and infrastructure, about how did you guys manage reallocating resources to drive more of that content internally, but also the approval process, especially not just the COVID crisis, but also as we started moving into the BLM issue and social equality. How did you guys handle making sure you had approvals and your content was being vetted properly? So tell us bring us inside a little bit about how you were managing that whole workflow.
Sure. I mean, I can get started. So for us, what was interesting is when COVID first happened, I would say 60% of our business or our staff didn't have a lot to do, right? I mean, we're talking about events people, we're talking about sales people, we're talking about group sales people, but marketing, we're a really small team, especially for an NFL team. There's only 3 or 4 of us. So we actually kind of drafted a bunch of people from the rest of the workforce and kind of grabbed people who had different skill sets and kind of had them work for us over the last 2 months and helped with brainstorming and content and brought them out of their comfort zone as a way to try to get as many ideas as possible, because we're acting so quickly. And as you mentioned, the second point about Black Lives Matter and social injustice, that came directly. So we had to have a lot of open discussions with our entire leadership team. And it was very clear that, like, you know, there's no missteps allowed when you're an NFL franchise. If we were to do something wrong, it would be on the front of ESPN News. So there are a lot of approvals. There's a lot of discussion, but luckily, pretty early on, we were very supportive. I don't know if you guys saw, but we were the first franchise that had a Black Lives Matter march, which happened right away when the first situation happened. And the team was completely supportive. I mean, they invited the entire staff out to march with players. So we got behind it in a very positive way, I believe, very quickly. And so that kind of aligned the staff and what our message was going to be. I think it was a lot harder for some other teams who had to play on a little bit of both sides based on not just their fans, but their ownership, right? So our owner came out very early and supported Black Lives Matter and supported the players, but not all teams acted that way.
Mike, did you have you're shaking your head a lot. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I think for Beard Brand, we're a little unique, or it's a little bit different for us than a lot of the examples and stories that I've heard from other folks yesterday and today, in that we're such a small group. I mean, we're a company of 14, 15 people, and everybody really owns their area. So when it comes to email and creating content for our blog, that just falls squarely on me. And when it comes to creating content for our video, for our YouTube channels, that falls on 3 or 4 content creators, Eric included, and a couple other influencers that we work with. And so we don't have a massive approval process. You kind of have a lot of freedom and trust to make good decisions and to try things. And as long as you're evaluating those things along the way. Now, for some of the more complicated things, I mean, we do a daily 15-minute tactical marketing meeting where the entire marketing team is together. So if there's anything pressing that comes up, we can really quickly have a group think about what our messaging and what our tone is going to be. And we did that for both COVID and Black Lives Matter.
And I think to add on to that, we're in a position where everyone's working remotely. So it's not people congregating around in an office to talk through this. So for us, those daily meetings became really integral to our day. We had a marketing stand-up in the morning and then a closeout at the end of the day. So there was a lot of opportunity to flag if we needed approval on stuff. There was a lot of ownership placed on the people who were managing the campaigns and programs. We do have our content team, and we did have a lot of good processes in place that we just rolled out into this. But in certain instances, we were working with less staff, and we were all working remotely. So those meetings were super important for us.
I have one last question to Josh in particular, because I interviewed you a couple of months ago about this. And one of the things you mentioned that I thought was really interesting was that you have a larger base down in Jacksonville. You have a larger base of users, a bigger audience than some of the agencies that needed to communicate to people during the early stages of the crisis. So you actually served a media function at one point, and I'm curious if that's going to continue. If those are the sorts of partnerships that you want to continue.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's really by case basis. So we are very connected to the city of Jacksonville. And in fact, the city owns the stadium that we play in, and they do COVID testing in our parking lot right now, which is one of the reasons we're nowhere near our offices. But, because we have 650,000 fans on each of our different social platforms and, an email database that's 7 figures, we were able to get out information in a way that some of the city folks weren't able to. And so we did act as that kind of public arm for the city when possible. It's a very fine line though, because we try not to play politics and we try to stay out of the city politics as much as possible. So we have a good relationship with them. We partner with them when it's for the civic good, when it's for the public good. We're gonna do what we can to put out as much information as we could. And we built a whole, a COVID-19, resource page that had resource resource from the city, from the CDC, you know, just to provide as much information as possible to our fan base. But I don't know if it's not necessarily a strategy that we focus on is, you know, partnering with the city to do those kind of things.
Well, thanks. I'm going to kick it back to you, Lisa.